All right, folks, in today's video, we have a snippet from Trail Cam Radio where Jake and Chad sit down with Aaron Warbritton from the hunting public to talk about scouting bedding areas in the postseason. Scouting in the postseason is one of the reasons why the hunting public is consistently successful. So let's get right into this conversation.
What are you putting value in as you're out walking, pieces of ground this time of year? And as far as, what are you putting value in as far as deer sign that you're finding right now?
Right now, I was just talking to Chad a while ago about this. Like, I go shed hunting too, I guess, if you will, like a lot of other folks do. But I don't ever find any antlers, it seems like. I just end up scouting the whole time. So what we're looking for this time of year, and the advantage that you have this time of year is, you don't have all the foliage on and stuff. So, and you can see last year's rut sign way better than you could if you went out in the middle of the summer. It's still semi-fresh. It's only a few months old at this point. So we go out there and we dive straight in the middle of the bedding areas right now. We try to cover as much ground as we possibly can at this time of year and basically iron out the entire access route, setup, everything right now. But when it comes to deer sign, most of it that we're looking for never changes, regardless of the time of the year. We're always looking for bedding areas, actual deer beds, rubs, tracks, trails, scrapes, and so on and so forth. But when we find it this time of year, we're paying more attention to when the sign was left. So, like, if there is a cluster of rubs there that still has some bark shavings on the ground and stuff in February and March, and the rubs may just look fresher. If you find a good cluster of rubs, how you find like a bunch of like little willow trees along the edge of a bedding area or whatever, and there'll be 8 or 10 rubs on them sometimes. Some of them will be old rubs from years past. Some of them will be fairly fresh. If you get to looking at those in detail, sometimes you can even tell like what time of the year they were made last fall, because bucks start rubbing, in September when the velvet comes off, and they rub somewhat clear up until they lose their antlers. So that's just a rub, for example. So when you come across that type of sign, you're trying to determine about what time of year it was left. And I'll use a quick example here that's more situation specific. But if you're scouting an oak flat right now that has some remnants of acorns from last fall, and you find a bunch of rubs in there from last fall and maybe a few scrapes that are sealed over that were made in late November or around Halloween or whatever, there's a real good chance all that sign was laid down last fall during, October, when there was a bunch of acorns in that area, or late September. And that's the sort of stuff that we're trying to identify. We're basically just backdating all that sign and then trying to figure out when it was left there and under which scenario or situation it was left. At times you'll hunt floodplain areas where maybe in the fall there was a big rain event or something, and it pushed a bunch of water up into bedding areas, and it forced deer into one particular location for weeks, maybe even a couple months in the fall. And you might run across a lot of deer sign there right now that was left there from last fall. Well, if you're not thinking about when it was left and why it was left during that time, and you just go back to hunt that in the middle of the fall, there's a real good chance that the deer won't be there. They're constantly moving around. So regardless of when we're scouting, especially this time of year, I would say we're relating that back to when it was left and what the situation was. I equate sign to trail camera pictures as well. It's all scouting, right? So when we check our cameras that have been left all fall, when we're out there scouting, shed hunting this time of year, we'll get pictures of a deer in a particular area, maybe say a bunch of pictures in late October. And in and around that camera in that bedding area, whatever, there'll probably be a bunch of rubs and scrapes left around that time. Good chance he was there working those rubs and scrapes in that same area during that time frame. But what we're doing is going back on Wonderground and looking at historical data then, trying to understand like what was going on, what type of weather event was going on when we got those pictures, or like you were just saying, what went into that during that time frame. And it's a guessing game. You know, you don't know for a fact why they're there all the time for sure, but if you can pick up a little piece here and there, it'll help you when it comes time to set up. And now, like I said, now is a killer time to scout because, you know, all the sign is preserved from last fall, and it's much easier to read now than it will be in the middle of the summer. You still learn a lot when you're out there in the summer, so if you can scout, go, regardless of the time of the year, and learn as much as you possibly can. But yeah, when it comes to deer sign, man, that's what we're always looking at, regardless of when we're out there.
As you are looking for beds this time of year, I guess, what is your guys' strategy or thought process in going in and looking for, you know, various bedding areas? As you mentioned, you're not nearly as aggressive as in the fall. So are there areas that you guys kind of have on a spring scouting checklist of we want to hit that because we couldn't in the fall, and try to go in there and learn more? And what are you trying to learn?
Yeah, I would say we're more aggressive now than we are in the fall. Like, we don't dive into the bedding in the fall. Well, I mean, we do, but we're much more careful. Right now, we just blow right through it all as fast as we can so that we can, you know, learn as much as possible in a short period of time. But, we go into areas, and it all depends on the part of the country that you live in or the specific habitat features involved. But when we're finding beds right now, in a high deer density area like Iowa, for example, we're looking for rubs left in and around the bed to see if it's a buck bed. Mm-hmm. Like when we're scouting a lot of properties, that's one of the things that we're looking at. You know, and those rubs could be left in September, or they could be a little bit fresher and left later on in the fall. That's not to say that a buck is going to rub right in the edge of his bed all the time, you know, but you're just looking for little clues like that. And they're easier to see now than they are at other times of the year. However, I would say, like, a lot of people can get lulled into finding deer beds right now, bending down and finding a bunch of hair in the bed or whatever, and then thinking, well, deer will bed, you know, in this same spot next October. And that's not necessarily the case. It's possible, but there's a good chance that's going to change a bunch between now and then. So you're still looking for hair in the beds and, you know, that banana-shaped deer bed in melting snow or whatever. They're always going to put themselves up against a piece of cover or in a situation where they can see out front and then have the wind blowing over the top behind them, you know, over a mass of cover or a down log or, you know. But sometimes the fall beds aren't worn in, you know, that they're using right now. So you got to do a little extra detective work. I'll take a stick and dig around in the leaves in a spot until I can maybe comb up some hair. And the deer might not have bedded there for 4 or 5 months, but, you know, if I think they were there last November, last October, then we pay attention to that, certainly. And then drop pins on it and everything. It's hard to know specifically what is going on, but the more ground that you cover right now, the more pins you can drop on your map. And every time we find the beds in the bedding area, we sort of reverse engineer it out from there. So we'll turn around and we'll follow those exit trails out of the bedding area. Say you have a half-acre block, thick stuff. There's 30, 40 beds in there, rubs, whatever. We start taking those trails, and there might be 5 or 6 different exit trails heading out of that bedding area in multiple different directions, and we'll follow those trails out and then start cutting sign like where those trails intersect. Maybe a trail goes out towards a creek bottom and then intersects with another cruising trail or a trail that's coming out of a doe bedding area or whatever. But wherever those trails intersect in a staging area or something like that, there's often scrapes right there. So we're marking all that right now specifically, not in the fall so much. I mean, it's postseason when we're going in there and reverse engineering a lot of that intel from the sign, and then we're picking trees, we're checking access routes as well. Basically, trying to come up with a plan to kill the deer on that scouting mission that's going to be used in that area. And when the sign that's in the actual bedding area is important, but I would argue that the sign along the edges of it in the staging areas is as important or more important than the sign in the bedding area. You know, you got to know that they're there. So you go into the bedding area and you identify, you know, if you believe they were there from last fall. But that staging area sign is the stuff that you can check in hunting season without blowing them out. So